That night, the glass slipped from Evelyn Hart's hand and shattered across the marble floor, its sharp echo slicing through what should have been laughter at her birthday dinner. Instead, there was only silence and the cold stare of her son, Michael. "Mother," he said, his tone smooth and hard as polished steel. "It's time you started being realistic. I can't keep supporting someone who has no income." Evelyn froze. Inside the dazzling Manhattan penthouse, where she and her husband Richard had lived for over 30 years, she suddenly felt like a stranger. Across the table sat her son, the little boy who once held her hand every morning on the way to school, now speaking with the voice of a banker. "What are you saying, Michael?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I paid for your education, your home, everything ever since you wore plastic sandals. And now things are different." Michael interrupted, sipping his red wine with a smile as thin as a blade. "My work is under pressure. You don't work anymore. You don't contribute. This apartment belongs to me as per Dad's will, and you know that." Evelyn couldn't believe her ears. The home that once echoed with laughter, with Richard's voice, with the warmth of family dinners, was now reduced to an entry in her son's calculations. "Dad left you something." Michael continued, his tone flat, like he was reading a contract. "The old boathouse in Clearwater. That's your share. I'll handle the paperwork to get you moved out soon." The words, "your share," made her chest tighten. Richard had left her his wife of 40 years, a decaying wooden shed, while everything else went to Michael. She struggled to keep her voice steady. "You must be joking. That place is falling apart. The roof leaks. The doors are rusted. Your father, he couldn't what?" Mother Michael leaned back, smirking. Couldn't believe he made the right choice. His eyes glinted with a mix of pity and disdain. Face reality. "Dad knew you never understood finance. He trusted me, and rightly so. I'll make sure the rest of the estate is used wisely. As for you, you already have somewhere to stay." Evelyn felt her world collapsing. The room seemed to shrink around her. The chandelier light reflected off Michael's face, revealing a coldness she had never seen before. Across from him, his wife Natalie quietly cut her cake without meeting Evelyn's eyes. "Are you really throwing me out tonight?" Evelyn asked, her breath shaky. "I just want things to be clear," Michael replied, setting his glass down. "You can stay a few days if you like, but I need space for work. The investors are coming next week." "Investors?" "Yes, I'm preparing to sell part of the shares to expand. Dad left debts, you know that, right? I have to handle them. Don't add to my burden, Mother." Burden. The word stabbed straight through her. Evelyn rose her chair, scraping the marble. She looked at her son, the person she once thought was the greatest blessing in her life. "Do you even know how hard your father worked? He built everything with his own hands, not with greed or deceit. And now you talk to me like I'm a stranger." Michael said nothing, just picked up his phone and typed quickly. "I'll have someone arrange the move. If you prefer, I'll hire help to pack." Evelyn trembled, not from anger, but humiliation. She remembered Richard's kind eyes in his final days, the way he'd promised to take care of her. And this was his care. A rotting shed by a cold lake. "Fine," she said softly, her voice low but steady. "If that's what you want, I'll go." Michael looked up, surprised at her sudden calm. "You know," she added, meeting his gaze sometimes, "what people throw away turns out to be the most valuable thing of all." She turned and walked out her heels, striking the marble floor in even echoing beats. With each step, a piece of her life seemed to fall away, but beneath the ache, a strange spark flickered inside her. The boathouse by Clearwater Lake, there was something about it, something that made her remember Richard's final words as he held her hand. "Trust me." She hadn't understood then, but now those words rang in her mind like a message. That night, Evelyn packed a small suitcase and left behind the glittering apartment, the city lights, and the son who no longer recognized her. On the long-distance bus, she stared out the window as the wind whipped against the glass like lashes. Mile by mile, her sorrow began to harden into resolve. She would go to Clearwater. She would open that boathouse, and she would find out what Richard had truly left her. Deep down, Evelyn knew one thing for certain. What awaited her there was not just old wood and dust, but a secret that could change everything. The next morning, a thin veil of mist covered Clearwater Lake, casting a quiet, almost chilly stillness over the water. The bus stopped at its final station, and Evelyn Hart stepped down, clutching her worn suitcase tightly. There was no one waiting, no one to greet her, only the sound of wind and the gentle rhythm of waves lapping against the wooden shore. The narrow path leading to Richard's boathouse wound through a cluster of trees, the ground littered with fallen leaves. She walked slowly, her canvas shoes damp with dew, each step sinking deeper into solitude. The boathouse appeared behind a line of pines, low gray, its iron door streaked with rust. A crooked wooden sign hung loosely from a single chain, the words Hart Boathouse barely visible after years of wear. Evelyn stopped and looked up. This had once been Richard's pride in their early years of marriage. He had built his first boat here with his own hands. But for the past 2 decades, ever since they'd moved to the city, the place had been abandoned. Now it was all she had left. She pulled out the old key that Daniel, her husband's lawyer, had given her at the will reading. The lock creaked, then clicked open. The wooden door slid aside, sending up a cloud of dust that hung in the air. The scent of oil, salt, and thyme rushed out, making her dizzy. Evelyn raised her flashlight, its dim beam sweeping across the walls, revealing strange shapes hidden beneath layers of canvas. There were 3 wooden boats, long and elegant, covered in dust, yet standing perfectly aligned as if waiting. Each was draped with a heavy tarp tied neatly with thick ropes. In the center of the room, a small brass plaque hung slightly askew, engraved with the words, "For Evelyn, when the wind is right." She stepped closer, her trembling fingers brushing over the cold metal. "Richard, what are you hiding from me?" she whispered, her voice echoing softly through the empty space. On the work table in the corner lay a thick sealed envelope with her name written in Richard's familiar handwriting. Evelyn sat down and carefully opened it. Inside was a long letter, and at the bottom a small map of the area around Clearwater Lake. She began to read. "My dearest Evelyn, if you're reading this, it means I've gone ahead. I'm sorry I had to keep this secret. 6 years ago, when I learned my heart didn't have much time left, I made a plan to protect you and to test who our son truly is." Her hands shook. "Michael," she breathed. "I knew he had changed," the letter continued. "Ambition blinded him, and I feared that if I left everything to both of you, you'd become a hostage to your own son. So I divided it. What he sees is glittering, but empty. What you receive is simple, but holds the real value." Evelyn paused, tears falling onto the page. She looked around the boathouse. Everything Richard had ever touched was still here. He had thought of every detail, even the pain of being misunderstood. "Inside the boats you see is what I've left for you. Not just wealth, but freedom," the letter concluded. "I trust you'll know what to do when the wind changes." Evelyn stood, her heart pounding. A gust of wind from the lake swept through the doorway, catching the corner of the tarp on the first boat and lifting it slightly. Sunlight streamed in, glinting off something polished beneath. She stepped forward and pulled the tarp away. Beneath the thick dust stood a magnificent antique boat, dark oak hull gleaming faintly, its brass trim catching the light. On its bow, engraved in small letters, were the words, Blue Promise 1956. Her mouth fell open. In the midday light, it looked like a masterpiece, not an abandoned relic. She pulled the cover from the second boat, a rare racing model from the 1960s. The third was a Norwegian-style canoe exquisitely crafted down to the smallest detail. Each bore a small brass plate engraved with the name of a prestigious shipbuilder. Evelyn didn't need expertise to know these were worth millions. The old boathouse had become a treasure vault. She stepped back dizzy with disbelief. "Richard, you really were mad," she whispered, half laughing through tears. On the desk, she found a small metal box containing 3 folders each, labeled Blue Promise Aurora and North Star. Inside were certificates, purchase records, insurance papers, and a brown leather notebook titled Heart Restoration Project. She opened it and found photos of Richard standing beside the boats, smiling brightly, his eyes gleaming with the same passion he'd always had when speaking of his dreams. Evelyn sank into the chair, tears rolling down her cheeks. For years, she had believed her husband was just a humble engineer devoted to his craft. But he had been quietly building a legacy. Outside, the surface of the lake began to shimmer, rippling with light, like scattered jewels. Evelyn rose, looking around the boathouse, her fear slowly replaced by something else, gratitude, and a growing sense of strength rising in her chest. Clutching the letter, she whispered, "All right, Richard. If this is your test, I won't fail you." From across the lake church, bells began to toll their sound, stretching softly through the cold morning air. Evelyn smiled faintly for the first time in weeks. Somewhere she could almost feel Richard watching over her, and in that boathouse amid dustwood and memories, a new beginning was waiting to be born. That afternoon, sunlight filtered through the pines, scattering into slender streaks across the old wooden floor of the boathouse. Evelyn sat at the table, Richard's letter still open before her. The lines of ink trembled gently in the breeze, as if he were still speaking to her. Beside it lay 3 folders neatly organized to the point of suspicion. Every page bore seals, signatures, and precise dates. Nothing about them was random. Even as death approached, that man had thought of everything, making sure she would never be hurt again. Yet the emotion stirring in Evelyn's heart soon gave way to an unfamiliar fear. The boats, the documents their worth, could be beyond imagination. If Michael ever found out, what would he do? She shivered, recalling his eyes that night at her birthday dinner, the eyes of someone who no longer saw his mother as a person, but as a burden. Rising from her chair, she pulled the dusty curtain shut and began to clean. Beneath the layers of dust lay another world: maintenance tools, design notebooks, even a small safe bolted beneath the desk. She knelt her fingers, brushing against the cold steel. The safe had a combination lock, and above it sat a small photo frame. Richard smiling, his arms around her, at the Clearwater docks on their 40th anniversary. "If you're reading this, you'll know how to open it." His voice seemed to whisper in her mind. Evelyn closed her eyes, thinking for a moment, then murmured, "Our anniversary date." She turned the dial slowly, each click echoing through the still room. When the final number aligned, the safe gave a soft release and opened. Inside was another envelope, thick and heavy, marked with Richard's handwriting, "For Evelyn, when you're ready." She opened it, her heart pounding. Inside were not only papers, but also a small USB drive and a handwritten note from Richard. "On this USB is my complete investment portfolio, stocks accounts, and everything I've transferred into a private fund called the Clearwater Trust. Everything belongs to you, legally and safely. Daniel Wexler knows how to guide you." Evelyn set the note down, taking a deep breath. Part of her wanted to cry, but another part burned with an unfamiliar warmth, not from fear, but from the realization that Richard had never underestimated her. He knew she could stand on her own. As evening fell, she decided to call Daniel. The signal around the lake was weak, and she had to step outside to get a connection. Daniel here came his deep, slightly raspy voice, cautious but kind. "Evelyn, are you all right? I just found what Richard left in the boathouse," she said, her voice trembling. "It's more than the boats. There are documents, a safe, and a USB. He mentioned something called the Clearwater Trust." On the other end, Daniel was silent for a few seconds, then sighed. "I figured you'd find it sooner or later. Richard wanted that. He prepared everything for you, but I wasn't allowed to tell you beforehand. He kept this from me all those years," Evelyn asked, torn between anger and gratitude. "Not to hide, but to protect," Daniel replied. He was afraid Michael might try to seize control. "The Clearwater Trust is private. You're the only one with access. There's also someone Richard wanted you to meet, Clara Monroe, his former financial advisor. She knows the entire investment system. I'll arrange a meeting for you both." I don't even know where to start," Evelyn admitted, gripping the phone tightly. "Start by believing that you can," Daniel said softly. Richard always did. After the call, Evelyn stood gazing out at the lake. The sunset shimmered red, like wine across the still water, each reflection glimmering softly. Her chest felt heavy, then suddenly lighter. Perhaps for the first time in years, she no longer felt weak. Night fell quickly. Evelyn lit the small stove, sat by the flickering fire, and reopened the leather notebook Richard had left. On the first page were the words, "Every journey begins with the courage to believe it's not yet over." Below was a detailed diagram of the boat's notes on the materials and lists of insurance companies specializing in antique appraisals. Richard had thought further ahead than she could have imagined. As the firelight danced across the ceiling, Evelyn smiled through her tears. "You always stayed one step ahead of me, Richard," she whispered. "But this time I'll catch up." The next morning, she put on her coat and prepared to return to town to meet Daniel and Clara as planned. Just as she reached the door, she froze. On the table where she had left the USB the night before, there was now an extra piece of paper. The handwriting was slanted, and it wasn't Richard's. "Be careful what you uncover. Not everyone wants that secret revealed." Evelyn stood motionless. Outside, the morning fog was still thick, but suddenly the air felt colder than ever. Who had entered the boathouse during the night? Who knew she was here? The questions echoed in her mind, slowing her steps. Perhaps the inheritance Richard left her wasn't just wealth, it was a story unfinished. And somewhere around this quiet lake, someone else was searching for the same thing, not to protect it, but to claim it. On Monday morning, a thick fog blanketed Clearwater Lake, swallowing the trees along its shore. Evelyn pulled her scarf tighter around her neck, unease creeping through her chest. The strange note left on the table the night before was still there, its corner slightly curled from the damp air. She had read it over and over, searching for any clue about who had written it. But the handwriting was elegant, slanted, and completely unfamiliar. Not everyone wants that secret to be revealed. The words echoed in her mind, cold as water dripping in the dark. Evelyn decided to take the note with her when she went to meet Daniel Wexler in town. The road along the lake was empty. The only sound was the crunch of gravel beneath the tires. When the car reached the law office, she saw a tall, middle-aged woman standing on the porch, her brown hair tied neatly, her gray coat long and formal. Daniel stepped out as Evelyn arrived. "Evelyn, let me introduce you. This is Clara Monroe, the financial advisor who worked with Richard during his final years." Clara shook Evelyn's hand, her eyes bright and steady. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Hart. I must say Richard was one of the most remarkable clients I ever had. He didn't just invest, he planned every move to protect the person he loved." Evelyn pressed her lips together, feeling both gratitude and sorrow rise in her chest. The three of them sat around a wooden table in a small office that smelled faintly of pine. Daniel opened a folder and slid it toward her. "This is the Clearwater Trust," he said. "Its current value exceeds $12 million, including shares in maritime companies, lakefront properties, and investments in renewable energy. Everything transferred to your name the moment Richard passed." Evelyn stared, unable to believe what she was hearing. Her heart pounded. 12 million, Clara nodded. He started building it 6 years ago after his heart diagnosis. Most of the profit came from his investments in classic yachts and coastal real estate. He had extraordinary foresight. Evelyn sat quietly, her hands clasped together. She looked down at the thick document and whispered, "So what do I need to do now?" Clara smiled gently. "First, stay calm, and don't let anyone know, especially your son." Daniel leaned forward. "Michael is in trouble. I've heard his company is facing a liquidity crisis. If he finds out the true value of what you own, he'll try to control it." Evelyn looked at them both, then nodded slowly. "I understand," Clara continued. "I'll guide you step by step, but first, there's something I want you to see." She placed a thin folder on the table bearing Richard's signature on the cover. "This is the blueprint for the house Richard bought 4 years ago by the lake. He planned to renovate it into a retreat just for you. Every expense from the furniture to the legal work has been covered. That property now belongs to you as well." Evelyn froze. "A house." Clara nodded. "The key is in this envelope." Evelyn opened it and found a small bronze key attached to a handwritten note from Richard. "For the day you dare to begin again." Her hands trembled as she held it. In her mind, she could see Richard smiling, his kind eyes shining, as he once told her, "You can live anywhere as long as there's water, wind, and faith." She swallowed her tears and whispered, "He never stopped thinking of me." Daniel glanced at Clara, then asked Evelyn, "What about the note you mentioned?" She took it from her coat pocket and laid it on the table. Both of them leaned in to examine it. Daniel frowned. "This handwriting isn't mine, and it's not Richard's either. It seems someone knows about the inheritance." Clara studied it closely, then said softly, "I've seen a similar style in Michael's office on some internal memos when he worked with his partners." Evelyn felt the air leave her lungs. "You mean Michael knows?" "Maybe not completely," Clara replied carefully. "But he suspects enough to start digging. And if he's had someone watching you, you need to leave here as soon as possible." Daniel nodded in agreement. "Move into the lake house. I'll finalize the paperwork and Clara will secure the financial accounts. From now on, use only the new number I'll give you and avoid any communication that could be traced." Evelyn gripped the key tightly, her heart racing but her gaze steady. "All right, I'll go today." As she left the office, she glanced out the window. The fog over the street had begun to lift, and the midday sunlight shimmered faintly on the distant lake, calm and deceptively peaceful. But inside, her waves were rising. She understood now that what Richard had left her was more than love or protection. He had placed her at the center of a test of loyalty of human nature, and that test had just begun. That afternoon, Evelyn drove her old car down the winding road that descended toward the southern edge of Clearwater Lake. The house appeared behind a line of drooping willows, gray stone walls, slanted roof-oak doors. It wasn't grand, but it was warm and inviting, with a small garden that looked directly out over the water. When she opened the door, a rush of fresh air filled the room, carrying the scent of pine. Everything was tidy, orderly, as if someone had just finished preparing the place for her arrival. On the kitchen table sat a basket of dried lavender and a small card that read, "Welcome home." CM Evelyn smiled softly, knowing Clara had arranged it. She stepped onto the porch and looked out at the lake, now glowing bronze in the afternoon sun. The light made her close her eyes for a moment. A new feeling stirred in her chest, peace mixed with vigilance. She was no longer the frail woman cast aside by her son. Now she was the keeper of a secret far greater than anyone in the Hart family could imagine. And she would protect it until the wind changed, just as Richard had once told her. On her first night in the lake house, Evelyn couldn't sleep. The sound of the wind brushing against the wooden window frames blended with the soft lapping of waves, creating a quiet yet unsettling rhythm. She sat by the window, watching the moonlight shimmer across the lake's surface, her fingers tracing the bronze key Richard had left her. Everything had happened too fast. The will, the boathouse, the letters Clara, the threatening note, and Michael. Around midnight, the phone rang. An unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. A man's voice came through calm but chilling. Mrs. Hart, I used to work with your husband. There are things in that boathouse best left undisturbed. Evelyn froze. Who are you? Someone who once owed Richard and doesn't want more trouble now. Take my advice, lock that place up, and stop looking. Then the line went dead, leaving only a long, hollow tone in her ear. Evelyn trembled, gripping the phone. Someone was watching her. The next morning, when Clara arrived to check on her, Evelyn recounted the call. Clara listened, her expression tightening. I suspect someone in the antique trade has caught wind of Richard's collection. Those boats aren't just collectibles, they're registered in international insurance records. Someone must have traced them. A chill ran down Evelyn's spine. Then what should we do? First, I'll hire a security firm to survey the property. You shouldn't go back to the boathouse alone for a few days. Evelyn nodded silently. She didn't tell Clara that she had left a small photo of Richard inside the boathouse, along with a note that read, I'm still here. Now she regretted it. It could be a clue for anyone trying to track her down. But beneath the fear, another emotion began to rise: anger. Anger that someone dared to threaten Richard's legacy, and anger at the thought that her own son might be behind it. That afternoon, Daniel called. Evelyn, I just got word. Michael's withdrawn all remaining cash from his company. It looks like he's scrambling to raise capital for a new investment. But here's the strange part, he just hired a private investigator in Burlington. Evelyn's grip on the phone tightened. You think he's having me followed, I can't say for sure, but it's suspicious. Evelyn, you need to be careful. She looked out at the lake where ripples shimmered across the surface. A small fishing boat drifted in the distance, a faint silhouette in the mist. Her heartbeat quickened. Maybe it was her imagination, but she felt as if someone was watching her. Taking a deep breath, she steadied herself. Daniel, I'll be fine. Richard didn't leave me this legacy, so I could live in fear. That night, after Clara left, Evelyn walked through the house, checking every lock, every window. Everything was secure. She lit the stove and made lavender tea, the scent Richard had always loved most. The steam rose gently, curling through the air in soft wisps of calm. If you were still here, Richard, what would you tell me to do? She whispered to the wind. A gentle breeze swept across the porch, rustling the curtain. Moonlight spilled across the wooden table, and when Evelyn turned, she froze. There near the back door was a wet footprint clearly visible on the floorboards. She stood motionless, then took slow, careful steps toward it. The footprint pointed outward, smaller than a man's, perhaps a woman's, perhaps someone who had just been there. Her fists clenched, but she didn't scream. One thought flashed through her mind: if that person meant to intimidate her, they would be back. But next time, Evelyn Hart would not be afraid. She would be ready, and she would find out who was truly trying to hide the secret Richard had left behind. The next morning, soft sunlight filtered through the willow branches, coating the house in a pale golden calm that felt almost too peaceful. But Evelyn Hart knew better. This peace was only a disguise. The footprint from the night before was still there, now dry on the wooden floor, clearly showing the small, refined shape of a woman's shoe. She had photographed it and sent the picture to Clara with a short message: someone was in the house. Less than an hour later, Clara arrived with 2 men from a private security firm. They inspected every corner of the house, the porch, and the backyard. One of them, a man named David, crouched near the path leading to the lake and pointed to faint tire tracks in the damp soil. "These are fresh," he said with a frown. "Could be from a bicycle or a small electric scooter, not a car." Evelyn stood nearby, gripping her keychain tightly. "Maybe it's someone from around here." Clara shook her head. "Most of the homes in this area are vacation properties. No one's living here this season. I think you should stay away from the house for a few days." Evelyn sighed. "I don't want to run away. This is my home. It's what Richard left me." Her voice was soft but firm. Clara looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but if you insist on staying, I'll arrange for someone to guard the property at night." Evelyn agreed. When the security team left, she walked down to the wooden dock behind the house, where the water shimmered with silver light. The wind carried a chill that lifted her gray hair slightly. Inside her, fear still lingered, but something else, something stronger, was rising in its place. Just then, the low hum of a small engine echoed across the lake. A worn motorboat approached slowly, its ripples spreading across the water. Evelyn squinted. The driver was an elderly man, thin, wearing a wool cap and a thick canvas jacket. As the boat reached the dock, he smiled, his voice rough but kind. "You must be Evelyn Hart. I'm Harold Kemp, used to work for your husband at the Hart Boathouse." Evelyn studied his face, then nodded. "I remember your name. Richard mentioned you in his journals." Harold nodded, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "I heard he passed. My condolences. He was a good man, but I'm afraid what he left you isn't just an inheritance." Evelyn stiffened. "You know something, don't you?" Harold gazed out over the lake, his tone low. "Years ago, we restored 3 antique boats together, but there was one that was never meant to be shown publicly. Richard said it was for the one who understands the meaning of freedom. I didn't know what that meant until now." He paused, pulling a small old key from his jacket pocket. "He gave me this, told me to hand it over if anyone ever came looking for the boathouse. I think that time has come." Evelyn took the key, her heart racing. "What does it open?" "A hidden compartment inside the blue promise," Harold replied. "You should see it for yourself." Then he turned and left his boat gliding slowly back across the lake, leaving long ripples trailing behind. Evelyn stood still, the small key resting cold in her palm. That afternoon, Clara returned. Evelyn told her everything from the encounter with Harold to the mysterious key. Clara listened thoughtfully. "If there's really a hidden compartment, then Richard must have wanted you to discover it yourself. But I'm coming with you. I don't want you to go there alone." Evelyn agreed, and the 2 of them drove back to the Hart Boathouse just as dusk settled over the lake. Inside, the dim beam of their flashlight swept across the silent hulls of the boats. Evelyn approached the first one, Blue Promise. She reached along the side panels, searching for the faint joint she had noticed before. Harold's key fit perfectly. When she turned it, a soft click sounded, and a hidden latch released, revealing a long, narrow compartment. Inside lay a rolled leather tube and a thick envelope. Evelyn opened the tube first. It was a technical blueprint, not of a boat, but of a lakefront facility labeled Hart Marine Restoration Private Project. The envelope contained a savings book under the name Evelyn Hart, showing a balance of $5 million. Clara exhaled sharply. My God, this must be the real fortune Richard hid. Evelyn held the passbook, overwhelmed with emotion. Richard hadn't just left her wealth. He had given her a path, freedom, independence, and a second chance to live on her own terms. But as the flashlight beam swept toward the door, Clara froze. Evelyn, look. On the floor near the entrance was a fresh footprint, larger, heavier, clearly not from a woman. Evelyn followed its direction toward the door, her heart pounding. She knew now they weren't alone in the boathouse, and the game Richard had begun had finally, truly begun. Outside the Hart boathouse, darkness fell faster than usual. The lake lay perfectly still, a mirror reflecting the pale lavender clouds of dusk. Clara switched off her flashlight and signaled for Evelyn to stay quiet. The wind hissed through the wooden seams, and in that fragile silence, a faint sound broke through the soft rustle of footsteps behind the row of boats. Both women held their breath. Clara slowly stepped back, her hand slipping toward the pocket of her coat where she had hidden her phone. Evelyn stood motionless, her heartbeat pounding so loud she could hear the rush of blood in her ears. A shadow flickered behind the third boat, quick and deliberate. The dim light from the doorway was just enough for Evelyn to see it, a tall man wearing a black coat and a hood. "Who's there, Clara?" called out, her voice steady but cold. No response. Only the creak of wood, then silence. Evelyn's chest tightened with unease. Clara pulled out her phone, switched on the flashlight, and swept the beam through the corner of the room empty. Whoever it was had vanished as if he had never been there. Evelyn steadied her breath. "We should leave, Clara." Clara nodded quickly, tucking the documents into her bag and locking the hidden compartment. As they stepped outside, Evelyn glanced back, and for the first time, she saw a faint glimmer in the rear window, as though someone still stood in the shadows watching them go. The drive back was quiet. Clara didn't speak until they had left the industrial area. "Evelyn, I'll report this to the local police in the morning, but you should know something. Richard once told me someone offered to buy his entire boat collection for $13 million, and he refused. Whoever that person was may still be interested." Evelyn turned to her, her voice hoarse. "He never told me about that. Richard wanted to keep it quiet," Clara said. "He suspected the buyer had ties to Michael. It seems he was right." Evelyn said nothing. The sound of her son's name tightened her chest. Since the will-reading Michael hadn't called, but deep down, she sensed he knew more than he let on. Maybe he had hired someone to watch her. Maybe he was the one who had shown up at the boathouse. She didn't want to believe it, but the memory of his cold eyes at her birthday dinner made that doubt burn even deeper. When they reached the house, Clara saw her inside and left. Evelyn locked every door, drew the curtains, and turned on the living room light. She sat in her chair trying to calm her mind, but her thoughts refused to settle. On the table, the folder labeled Heart Marine Restoration Project lay neatly in place like an invitation. She opened it and read through Richard's notes, line by line. The project was a plan to reopen the Hart Boathouse under a new name, Evelyn Marine. Richard had written, "All technical rights and profits belong to you. When the wind changes, this will be your way back to the world." She ran her fingers over the words, feeling the warmth of his memory. Richard had left her more than money. He had left her purpose. The ringing of the phone shattered the silence. The screen showed Michael. Evelyn hesitated, then answered. "Mother," you finally picked up his voice, came through a mix of impatience and fatigue. "Where are you?" Evelyn's tone was calm. "Where your father wanted me to be." "What do you need, Michael? I just want to make sure you're safe. There are rumors Dad left you more than just that boathouse." "Is that true?" Evelyn said nothing, hearing the pounding of her own heart. "You should focus on your part of the inheritance," she replied. "Mine has nothing to do with you." Michael gave a short, dry laugh. "You've always been good at keeping secrets, but don't forget everything in this family once belonged to Dad, and I'm the legal heir." Then he hung up. Evelyn stared at the phone, a chill spreading down her spine. There was no doubt now Michael knew. Outside, the wind picked up, swaying the drooping willows. In the dark window, Evelyn saw her reflection. Not the frail, abandoned woman she once was, but someone changed. She whispered softly, as if speaking to Richard and to herself. "If my son wants a fight, he'll have to face a mother he's never known before." The next morning, a light rain fell over Clearwater Lake, blurring its surface beneath a veil of thick, white mist. Evelyn sat at the dining table, her cup of tea long gone cold in her hands. She hadn't slept all night. Michael's words kept echoing in her mind, each one sharp, arrogant, and deliberate, spoken not as a son to his mother, but as someone determined to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. At exactly 8 o'clock, the doorbell rang. It was Clara, her face grave. "I just got word from Daniel's office," she said quietly but urgently. Michael contacted him this morning, demanding to review Richard's original will documents. He said he wanted to verify fairness. Evelyn looked up, her eyes darkening. "So he's preparing for a legal attack." "Possibly," Clara replied. "Or it could be intimidation. Michael doesn't have enough proof about what you possess, so he's trying to rattle you." Evelyn rose and walked to the window. The rain had grown heavier, the droplets striking the wooden railing in rhythmic bursts. "Richard was right," she murmured. "When faced with greed, people reveal who they truly are." Then she turned her voice steady and resolute. "If he wants a fight, I won't back down." Clara nodded slightly, though worry lingered in her eyes. "You should still be careful." Last night, the security team reported someone near the property standing at the gate for a few minutes before leaving. No one could identify who it was. Evelyn gripped the edge of the table, forcing herself to stay calm. It could be him, or someone he sent. She took a deep breath, then allowed a faint smile. "Clara, I want to go to the boathouse this afternoon. I'm done hiding. I need to see everything Richard left behind before Michael does something foolish." That afternoon, the rain stopped. The dirt road leading to the Hart boathouse was still damp tire marks cutting through the mud. When they arrived, the weak sunlight broke through the clouds, glinting off the wet tin roof. The familiar scent of damp wood filled the air as Evelyn pushed open the door. She glanced around as though greeting an old friend. Clara went first, carefully scanning each corner, then nodded to signal it was safe. Evelyn walked toward the second boat, Aurora. She remembered Harold's words. Only the one who understands the meaning of freedom can open the rest. On the side of the boat, she found a narrow bronze seam, so skillfully crafted it was almost invisible. From the ring of old keys Richard had left in his drawer, Evelyn took one small key and tried it. The panel clicked open with a soft sound. Inside was another envelope and a small black leather notebook. Evelyn opened it and saw Richard's familiar handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means you're no longer afraid. Inside, Aurora, lies your answer. I didn't leave you an inheritance, I left you an opportunity. Turn this place into whatever you wish, because I saw strength in you even when you couldn't see it yourself." She read slowly, each word sinking deep into her heart, a small flame lighting within her chest. Inside the envelope was a set of documents labeled Evelyn Hart Sole Owner, Hart Restoration, LLC. Clara gasped. "Oh my God, Richard founded an entire company in your name. The registration is still valid and the accounts are active." Evelyn sat down, her hands trembling slightly. "He trusted me that much." Clara nodded. "More than that. He built everything so you could start a new illegal business, an investment fund strong enough to operate for at least 5 years. Evelyn smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes. I thought my life was over, that all I had left were memories. But now I see Richard wanted me to live, not just survive. The sound of an engine outside startled them both. Clara rushed to the window. A black sedan had stopped right in front of the boathouse. The car door opened and a tall man in a long coat stepped out. Evelyn only needed one glance to know Michael had arrived. Her heart skipped, once then steadied calm and cold. "So my son couldn't wait any longer," she said softly, her voice like steel. "Good. It's time he learned exactly what his father left behind and who he left it to." Michael Hart stepped out of the car, the wind from the lake whipping through his coat, his leather shoes sinking into the wet ground. He did not look like a son coming to see his mother, but like a man arriving to collect a debt. Clara instinctively took a step back, but Evelyn stood firm at the doorway of the boathouse, small in stature, yet unshakable in presence. Mother Michael called out, his voice half surprised, half cold. "I thought you'd be hiding a little longer." Evelyn didn't answer right away. She studied her son, the pale face from sleepless nights, the eyes filled with suspicion and hollow confidence. "Hiding?" she asked softly. "I have nothing to hide, Michael. But it seems you have something to say." He stepped closer, his shoes making soft, wet sounds in the mud. "I just want the truth." He said, his gaze flicking toward Clara before settling back on his mother. "I know Father didn't just leave you this run-down boathouse. There are hidden assets, funds, a company under your name, and I want to know why." Evelyn kept her voice calm, though her heart pounded. "Who told you that?" Michael shrugged. "People who used to work with him. He wasn't as careful as you think. There are contracts, registrations, even people who helped him hide money." His eyes shifted toward Clara. "Maybe her." Clara clenched her fists but replied evenly, "I act under legal authority. Everything Richard Hart left behind is legitimate, Michael, and none of it belongs to you." He let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Doesn't belong to me. You're talking to the legal heir of Richard Hart. I'm his son. I have every right to know what my mother is doing with my father's fortune." Evelyn met his stare. "You have the right to know, but not the right to take. Your father saw what you'd do if you had everything, and he was right." Michael froze, his expression tightening. "What are you talking about?" Evelyn took a step forward, her voice steady but sharp as a blade. "Your father left you what you thought mattered most, the penthouse, the shares, the reputation, and you turned all of it into ashes in just a few months. What he left for me, the things you called junk, those are what truly hold value." Michael's face flushed red. He moved closer, his tone sharp and defensive. "You think you can handle all of this alone? You don't understand how these things work. You're 70 years old, no experience, no connections. What can you possibly do with them?" Evelyn looked at him steadily, her voice even. "I don't need connections, Michael. I have something you've lost: faith and integrity." The words stopped him cold. His eyes flickered, then hardened again. "So you're really choosing to stand against me?" Clara spoke up, her voice firm. "Michael, I suggest you leave. If you continue this, I'll have to report your behavior as harassment." He turned to her, smirking. "Call whoever you like, but don't think my mother can hide forever behind your paperwork." Then he leaned closer to Evelyn, lowering his voice. "I'll find out everything, Mother, and when I do, don't say I didn't warn you." He turned to leave, but just before getting into his car, he glanced back at the boathouse. "Father lied to both of us. You worship him, but soon you'll see he wasn't as perfect as you believed." Then he slammed the door. The engine roared and the tires splashed muddy water as he drove off. The sound faded, leaving behind a heavy silence. Clara exhaled, her shoulders tense. "Evelyn, are you all right?" Evelyn nodded slowly, though her eyes were distant and contemplative. "No. But I know what I have to do." She looked around the boathouse where the boat stood silently in the dim light. Everything Richard had left suddenly felt sacred. She turned to Clara, her voice low and steady. "If Michael wants a battle, I won't run, but I won't let him destroy his father's legacy." Clara nodded admiration, softening her expression. "Then what's our next step?" Evelyn looked toward the lake where the fading sunlight cast golden ripples across the water. "We begin the project Richard believed in. A mother and son may stand on opposite sides, but I'll make sure the world knows who truly deserves the name Hart." The wind from the lake grew stronger, rustling the tarp, covering the blue promise as if in silent agreement. In the cool twilight, Evelyn stood tall, her silver hair lifting gently in the breeze. For the first time, she truly looked like the rightful master of the legacy that bore the Hart name. The next afternoon, the sky over Clearwater turned a heavy shade of gray, a sure sign that a storm was coming. Evelyn stood on the porch of the wooden house, watching dark clouds gather over the lake. Ever since her encounter with Michael the day before, her mind hadn't found peace. His face as he left, filled with anger, hurt and pride, kept replaying in her thoughts. But what chilled her most was his final words. "Soon you'll see that Father wasn't as perfect as you thought." She didn't understand, or perhaps she didn't want to. Richard had kept secrets, yes, but every one of them had been to protect her. Still, Michael's voice had left a small crack of doubt in her heart. Was there something Richard hadn't told her? When Clara arrived, she found Evelyn still standing on the porch, holding Richard's notebook tightly against her chest. "Bad news," Clara said, placing a stack of documents on the table. "I just received a copy of a formal request from Michael filed with the court. He's demanding a full audit of Richard Hart's estate. It looks like he's going to sue." Evelyn wasn't surprised. She simply nodded. "I've been expecting that." Clara sighed. "I know you're strong, but this won't be easy. Michael has hired his own lawyers, and he's digging through Richard's old company records. If they find that Richard withheld any assets off the books, they'll argue that transferring everything into your name was unlawful." Evelyn frowned. "Richard didn't do anything wrong. He only protected what was ours." "True, but the law doesn't understand, love," Clara replied gently. "I'll have Daniel prepare our legal response. In the meantime, you should avoid Michael for a while." Evelyn looked at her, her voice calm but firm. "No, I won't hide. I have what he doesn't proof of what Richard left." She pointed to the file labeled Heart Restoration, LLC. Richard signed every paper legally. He foresaw this. Clara pressed her lips together. "Even so, you'll need allies. I have a friend, an investigative journalist who specializes in complex inheritance cases. If you agree, I can have him interview. You get your side of the story documented. Once the public sees you as the victim of greed, Michael will think twice before attacking openly." Evelyn thought for a moment, then nodded. "Do it. If Richard had the courage to leave me this legacy, I'll have the courage to defend it." Later that afternoon, Clara left just before the rain began. Evelyn stayed behind, sorting through the papers Richard had left. Among the folders, she found a small envelope tucked inside the back cover of his notebook. On it were the words, "Open, only if you ever begin to doubt." Her hands trembled slightly. Michael's words echoed again. She took a deep breath and opened the envelope. Inside were 3 papers, a copy of a stock agreement, a financial report, and a short letter from Richard. "My dearest Evelyn, if you are reading this, it means you've heard unpleasant things about me. I'm sorry for leaving behind a piece of my past that may cause you pain. Before I created the Clearwater Trust, I once held shares in a project with our son. That project failed and Michael lost faith in me. I secretly bought out his losses to keep him from going bankrupt, but he never knew. I did it to preserve his image of me as a perfect father. Perhaps that secrecy pushed him even further away. Evelyn set the letter down, tears filling her eyes. At last, she understood. Richard had never meant to punish Michael. He only wanted to protect their son's dignity, to give him a chance to recover without shame. But his silence had been mistaken for betrayal. The rain began to pour, hammering the metal roof. Evelyn rose and looked out the window. In the distance, through flashes of lightning, she saw a familiar black sedan parked across the road. Headlights off the body slick with rain. Her heart tightened. Michael was still watching. She didn't call Clara, nor did she alert the police. She simply stood there gazing at the motionless car in the storm. Her emotions were a storm of their own, anger, sorrow, and love all at once. Then she whispered to herself, "Richard saved him once. Now it's my turn." The next morning, the sky cleared after the night's downpour. Evelyn carefully placed Richard's envelope inside the safe and locked it. She now had all the answers, and she knew she couldn't let Michael fall any further. She picked up the phone and called Daniel. "I want to arrange a private meeting with Michael. No lawyers, no court, just mother and son." Daniel hesitated. "Evelyn, are you sure he's under a lot of pressure? And this could—" That's exactly why she interrupted, her voice steady. "If I don't speak to him now, we'll lose this family forever." Outside, the lake shimmered softly in the morning light. Evelyn gripped the phone tightly, her eyes resolute. The battle over the inheritance might have begun, but she knew the real fight was not for money, it was to win back the heart of her son. 3 days later, the sky over Clearwater was unusually clear. Clouds drifted slowly above the still lake, the sunlight scattering across the surface like countless fragments of glass. Evelyn Hart chose a lakeside cafe, the same one Richard used to take her to for their anniversaries. She arrived early, sat at a table by the window, ordered a cup of mint tea, and waited. Her heartbeat was slow but heavy, as though a stone pressed against her chest. Outside, the familiar black sedan pulled up. Michael stepped out, the top button of his shirt undone, exhaustion etched on his face. He looked around, spotted his mother, hesitated for a second, then walked toward her table. "Thank you for coming," Evelyn said calmly. "I wasn't planning to refuse." Michael replied, sitting down, his eyes avoiding hers. "Your lawyer said I'd get an invitation, but I didn't think you actually wanted to see me." Evelyn took a sip of tea, the warmth spreading on her tongue. Her voice deepened. "I don't want to fight in court. I just want to understand what it is you're looking for." Michael leaned back, giving a dry laugh. "You already know. The truth. And fairness." Evelyn studied her son. His face, though defiant, carried an underlying weariness, the kind that comes from fighting too long for something hollow. "Fairness," she said softly. "Your father trusted you enough to give you the largest share of the estate. And look what happened. What became of that penthouse Michael?" He stiffened. "That's not relevant." "It is." Evelyn interrupted. "You sold most of the furniture, mortgaged the penthouse for a risky investment, and when it all collapsed, you blamed your father and me instead of yourself." Michael slammed his palm against the table, his voice cracking. "Because he lied to me. He made me believe I had a chance to run the family business while the real plan was hidden with you." Evelyn didn't flinch. She met his gaze. "No, Michael. He didn't choose me over you. He chose truth over illusion." Michael's laugh was cold. "Truth or pity for you?" "Neither," she said firmly. He loved me, but he understood you, and he knew greed would destroy you if no one stopped it. Silence fell between them. Outside, the lake rippled gently beneath the blue sky. Michael took a deep breath, his eyes darkening. You don't understand. You've always been above me. Protected, pitied, safe. You've never had to prove your worth. Evelyn set her cup down, her tone slow but piercing. And what do you think I've done all my life? I gave up my youth, my work, my dreams, just to keep this family together. I never asked for anything. I never complained. But after your father died, you threw me out of our home, and now you want to talk about worth. Michael froze. For the first time, he saw in her eyes not pain, but strength, something that made him feel small. Her voice softened. Richard never wanted to punish you. He saved you, Michael. 6 years ago, when your investment failed, he secretly bought out your losses so you wouldn't go bankrupt. He never told you because he didn't want to wound your pride. The color drained from Michael's face. He stared at her in disbelief. You mean he saved me? Yes, Evelyn said quietly. And he kept that secret until the day he died, so you wouldn't feel indebted, only responsible. Michael lowered his head, his hands trembling slightly. For the first time, the arrogance in his eyes faded, replaced by raw confusion. I didn't know. Now you do, she said softly, and you have the chance to make it right if you want to. The silence stretched between them. A single leaf drifted past the window, landing in a puddle on the street outside. Michael looked up again, his expression gentler, though still guarded. What do you want from me, forgiveness? Evelyn gave a sad smile. I don't need your forgiveness. I just want you to understand. Your father didn't choose me to punish you. He chose me because he believed I could help you find yourself again when the time came. And Michael, that time is now. Michael was silent. His hands clenched, his breathing uneven. Finally, he stood, his voice low and strained. I need time. Evelyn nodded. I'll wait. But remember, if you go back to the path you were on, you'll lose everything. Not because of me, but because of yourself. He turned and walked away slowly, disappearing into the fading afternoon light. Evelyn watched him go, feeling a quiet weight lift from her chest, even though nothing was truly resolved. On the table, her tea had gone cold, but the faint scent of mint lingered. She exhaled softly. Outside, birds glided over the lake, the wind carrying their calls into the distance. In Evelyn's heart, a fragile but steady hope began to grow. If Richard's love had once saved her from despair, then a mother's love might yet save the son who had lost his way. And she knew now that was the true inheritance Richard had left for them both. A week after the meeting at the cafe, rain had settled over Clearwater without pause. The wind blowing in from the lake made Evelyn's wooden house tremble gently, but she paid no attention. On her desk, the documents for Heart Restoration, LLC lay open beside a cold cup of tea and a photo of Richard smiling. She was deep in thought. The conversation with Michael still lingered in her mind. He had listened, had softened for a brief moment, yet pride and distance still wrapped around him like armor. She knew one conversation could not undo years of hurt. That afternoon, Clara arrived carrying new updates. The court has temporarily suspended Michael's lawsuit. She said, her tone a mix of relief and caution. His lawyer filed a request for delay due to personal reasons. It seems he's reconsidering. Evelyn gave a faint smile. He needs time. His father was stubborn too. The only difference was Richard knew when to stop. Clara sat down studying her. You still believe Michael can change. Most people in your place would have cut ties by now. Evelyn slowly shook her head. I can't. A mother can be disappointed, even hurt, but she can never stop loving her child. Richard used to say, When the water is still enough, the mud will settle. Michael is still caught in the storm, but one day he'll find calm again. They fell silent, listening to the rain tapping steadily on the roof. Then Clara set another folder on the table. I think it's time you make heart restoration public. The registration is complete, the permits are approved, and the first team of engineers is ready. People around the lake are already talking about the old workshop coming back to life. Evelyn opened the folder, her eyes glowing with resolve. Yes, it's time. I want everyone to see what Richard left behind, not wealth, but vision. And I will be the one to bring it to life. 3 days later, news of Heart Restoration's reopening spread throughout Clearwater. Local newspapers featured her photo, the silver-haired woman standing proudly before the old boathouse under a new sign, Evelyn Marine, where craft meets legacy. Clara helped organize a small ceremony. More than 20 people attended, including locals who had once worked with Richard years ago. When Evelyn stepped up to the podium, the breeze from the lake carried the scent of damp wood and salt water. Thank you all for being here. She began, her voice calm yet resonant. My husband, Richard Hart, believed that boats were more than vessels. They were witnesses to the human journey, to effort to love, and to the faith that no one is ever useless if they still know how to rebuild from ashes. Today, I am not reviving a company, I am reviving that spirit. The applause that followed was warm and genuine. Clara watched from below, her eyes glistening. When the ceremony ended, a man standing at the back of the crowd began to approach. Evelyn recognized the familiar stride. Michael. He wore a simple shirt and carried a small bouquet of flowers. The murmurs around them quieted as he stopped before her, his expression uncertain. I'm not here to interrupt Mother, he said softly. I just wanted to congratulate you. Evelyn said nothing at first, studying him. In the golden light of sunset, his face no longer held defiance, only exhaustion and quiet regret. Richard would be glad, she said, her voice gentle, but trembling slightly. Your father once told me every boat needs wind to set sail, but it also needs someone steady at the helm. Michael lowered his head. I've steered in the wrong direction for too long. He placed the bouquet on the nearby work table. If you'll let me, I'd like to help not for money, but for Father. The words made Evelyn's throat tighten. Clara smiled faintly and stepped away, leaving them alone. Evelyn looked at her son, then nodded slowly. If you truly mean that, start by learning how to rebuild a boat. Michael let out a quiet laugh, a rare, genuine, slightly awkward smile. Then you'll have to teach me because I don't know a thing. Your father left the blueprints, Evelyn said gently, taking his hand. We'll finish them together. As the sun disappeared behind the trees, mother and son stood before the boathouse, the wind from the lake carrying the scent of wood and the soft rhythm of the waves. Evelyn lifted her gaze, feeling that Richard was somewhere in that breeze, watching them, smiling. She whispered softly like a promise. We'll continue, Richard. Both of us. And this time your son won't lose his way again. A month after the grand reopening, Heart Restoration had truly come back to life. Each morning, sunlight streamed through the old glass windows of the workshop, casting warm beams across rows of freshly cut wooden planks stacked neatly against the walls. The air was filled with the rhythmic sounds of hammers, chisels, and saws, mingled with the scent of varnish and pine. Evelyn Hart walked slowly along the line of boats being restored, her heart swelling with emotion. The once abandoned boathouse, once heavy with dust and silence, now thrummed with life, with work, and with the quiet pride that Richard had left behind. Michael was bent over, measuring the hull of the Blue Promise, his hands once accustomed to holding phones and contracts, now covered in sawdust. He looked up when he heard his mother's footsteps. This part's off by 1/2 inch. He said, his voice hoarse but steady with focus. "I'll adjust the edge." Evelyn smiled, unable to hide the warmth in her eyes. "Your father used to say building a boat is like raising a child, one small misalignment, and it will never sail straight." Michael chuckled, wiping sweat from his brow. So he was philosophical, even in the workshop. He was philosophical everywhere, she said softly, her gaze distant. "I only wish I'd truly understood him before he was gone." They stood quietly for a while, the sound of wind rustling through the wooden beams filling the silence. Then Michael turned to her and asked in a low voice, "Mother, can I ask you something? Did Father really keep things from me because he thought I was greedy?" Evelyn looked at him thoughtfully. "No, Michael. He was afraid you'd lose yourself. Your father once told me that if you saw the entire fortune too soon, you'd forget the value of creating it." Michael lowered his head, his voice soft. "And that's exactly what I did. But now you're doing the opposite," she said gently. "You're building again, with your own hands." That afternoon, the workshop welcomed an unexpected visitor journalist, David Lorne, the one Clara had promised to invite. Young, energetic, and sharp-eyed, he carried a camera and a notebook. "I heard heart restoration has become the pride of Clearwater," he said, his tone filled with admiration as he looked around. A widow rebuilding her husband's legacy with her own hands, that's the kind of story everyone wants to hear. Evelyn smiled modestly. "I didn't do it alone. My husband left the vision, and my son is helping me fulfill it." David glanced toward Michael, who was wiping his hands. "Your son used to be a businessman, right? What made you leave the city to build boats?" Michael smiled, his tone sincere. "Because I realized what needed fixing wasn't the boats, it was me." The article was published 3 days later on the front page of the Clearwater Chronicle with the headline, "The Woman Who Turned Legacy into Forgiveness." The photo showed Evelyn standing beside Michael next to the Aurora, both smiling under the sun. The story spread quickly, bringing them new orders, words of encouragement and admiration from all around. But more importantly, it gave Michael something he hadn't felt in years, the belief that he was finally doing something right. That evening, when the workers had gone home and only the sound of crickets filled the air, Evelyn walked out to the dock, gazing at the moonlight shimmering over the lake. Michael followed, carrying 2 cups of hot tea. "For you," he said, setting one beside her. They sat together in silence, watching the rippling water. After a long moment, Evelyn spoke softly. "Do you remember the first time your father taught you to row a boat?" Michael laughed, his voice warm and light. "I do. He made me go out to the middle of the lake alone and pretended to walk away to see how I'd manage. I was terrified." Evelyn nodded, smiling faintly. "He never taught with words. He taught by letting you find your own way, and now you finally have." Michael said nothing, his face calm under the moonlight, more at peace and more mature than ever before. "Mother," he said quietly, "I haven't apologized for what I said, for what I did." Evelyn placed her hand gently over his. "You don't need to say it. Just live differently." "But I need to," he replied, his voice trembling slightly. "When Father died, I was angry. I thought he left me to carry all the weight. I was jealous because he trusted you instead of me. But now I understand he didn't give you the fortune, he gave you responsibility, and you turned it into something I never could: compassion." Evelyn looked at him, tears glistening in her eyes. "Richard always said true love never disappears. It only changes form." She squeezed his hand, her voice breaking softly. "Now I know he was right." Across the lake, a gentle wind moved through the willows, carrying the scent of fresh wood into the night air. Michael stood smiling as he gazed out at the horizon. I think I'll stay here, Mother. I want to help you open a gallery, a place to tell the story of heart restoration. About Father, about you, and about those who never gave up. Evelyn lifted her face toward the moonlight, her silver hair glowing softly. Your father would be proud. Michael turned his smile, echoing Richard's. No, Mother. He'd be smiling because you finally brought me back to where I belong. They stood side by side, watching the lake where the blue promise rocked gently, as if ready for a new voyage. Evelyn whispered, her voice blending with the wind. Every boat needs a guide, Michael, but sometimes it's the waves themselves that remind us we're finally on the right course. The night over Clearwater was peaceful, the moonlight spreading across the water like a silver ribbon. And in that quiet scene, mother and son sat together, no longer divided by resentment, but united by blood and forgiveness. What Richard had left behind had fulfilled its purpose, not to divide, but to heal. His true legacy was not in wealth, but in love and trust. And now Evelyn and Michael were carrying it forward, as if it were the very breath keeping them alive. Autumn arrived in Clearwater, carrying the scent of fresh wood and the gentle sound of waves lapping against the dock. The Heart Restoration Workshop had become the pride of the lakeside town. Locals stopped by to watch the restoration of vintage boats while newspapers called Evelyn Hart, the woman who rekindled a legacy from ashes. She remained as simple as ever, wearing her faded blue work shirt with her hair tied neatly behind her head, but her eyes shone brighter than they ever had. That morning, Clara brought good news. Evelyn, the town council, wants to partner with Heart Restoration on a heritage yacht preservation project. They're inviting you to serve as honorary advisor. Evelyn smiled, her eyes glimmering. Richard would love that. He used to say boats aren't just objects, they're stories that know how to float. When Clara left, Michael walked in, carrying a folder. Mother, I finished the design proposal for the new exhibition wing. I want to call it the Legacy Hall. He laid the blueprint on the table, showing a central section dedicated to the Blue Promise, the first boat Richard ever restored with Harold. Evelyn froze for a moment, her fingertips brushing the drawing. That's a good name, she said softly, because this legacy is what saved us. Michael nodded, his eyes drifting to the framed photo of Richard on the wall. I keep thinking Mother-Father was right. He didn't leave me wealth, he left me a lesson. If I had understood it back then, things would have been different. Evelyn stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. The greatest thing isn't never making mistakes, Michael. It's finding the strength to turn back. Your father used to say a man who can repair his boat in the middle of a storm is the only one worthy of sailing again. A while later, Harold arrived. The old man, silver-haired but spry, carried a small wooden box. I was cleaning out the storage room and found this, he said, placing it on the table. Evelyn opened it, and inside was an old brass compass, its edge engraved with the words, "For her who found her way." She froze, eyes welling with tears. Harold smiled warmly. Richard left it with me years ago, told me to give it to you when you finally found your direction. Evelyn lifted the compass, the light catching its glass face, reflecting both her and her son's faces within the circle. Now I understand, she whispered. He never hid from me, never hid from anyone. He was waiting for me to be strong enough to find the path myself. That afternoon, the lake glowed gold in the light of sunset. Michael and his mother pushed the Blue Promise gently into the water. Ripples spread outward, the breeze soft against their faces. I remember the first time Father taught me to row, Michael said with a quiet smile. I was terrified, and you stood on the shore crying, but now you're not afraid anymore. Evelyn nodded softly. Because I know now you've learned how to keep your balance. The boat drifted slowly into the open lake. On the shore, Harold and Clara stood side by side, saying nothing. Behind them, the click of a camera captured the moment mother and son together on the water, surrounded by the glowing light of dusk. Evelyn lifted her gaze to the sky, her silver hair catching the breeze. In that instant, she felt Richard beside her, smiling in the warm, golden light. She whispered softly, as if speaking into the wind, "Thank you, Richard. I finally found the direction you left for me." As the boat glided forward, the old brass compass shimmered in the sun, its needle pointing steadfastly ahead. The lake lay calm, and in that radiant autumn light, Evelyn knew the legacy had fulfilled its purpose to bring back the souls once broken, guiding them home to the same horizon. The first winter in Clearwater arrived in silence. The lake was covered in a thin layer of white mist, and the breeze carried the scent of fresh wood and the distant tang of sea salt. Inside the Heart Restoration Workshop, golden light spilled from the windows, reflecting off the newly finished boats. Evelyn Hart sat at her desk, gazing at the miniature model of the Blue Promise Richard's very first boat. When she ran her fingers along the smooth wooden surface, a quiet calm filled her heart. Everything had changed in a year. From a woman abandoned by her son, Evelyn had become the leader of the workshop, inspiring young apprentices through the Heart Apprenticeship Program, a project she and Michael had built to teach boat building to the youth around the lake. She was in the middle of writing a letter to the first graduating class. When you see a boat, don't just think of wood and paint. Think of the hands, the patience, and the faith that built it. The door opened and Michael entered wearing a thick coat and carrying a small bouquet of dried lavender. "I brought this for you, Mother. The scent reminds me of Father." Evelyn smiled softly. "Your father is still here in every breath of the wind and every piece of wood we touch." Michael sat down looking at the model boat. "Mother, I've made a decision. I'm going to sell the penthouse in Manhattan. It doesn't belong to us anymore." Evelyn looked at him, her eyes kind. "You don't need my permission. The penthouse is only walls and stone. What truly belongs to you is what you're rebuilding here, the legacy of your father." Michael nodded. "I'm going to use the money to open another workshop on the south side of the lake. I'll name it the Richard Fund. Part of the revenue will go toward the apprenticeship program." Evelyn was quiet for a moment, then smiled gently. "You've finally learned the true meaning of inheritance." Outside snow began to fall lightly, the white flakes drifting down like ashes of old memories. The light from the workshop windows filled the room with warmth. Evelyn stood put on her coat and stepped out onto the porch, gazing at the shimmering water beneath the gray sky. "A year ago today," she said softly, "I opened the door to that old boathouse and thought my life was over. But it turned out that was only the beginning." Michael came to stand beside her, his hands tucked in his pockets, his eyes fixed on the distance. "No one else could have turned it into what it is now, Mother. Father planted the seeds, but you're the one who made them bloom." Evelyn shook her head. "No, Michael. I only kept the flame alive. You're the one who rekindled it." He looked at her, a faint smile forming in the cold air. "Father once said that when a man learns to fix his mistakes, the storms no longer scare him. And now you believe that?" Evelyn asked. "I do," Michael replied. "Because you've shown me that even when everything is lost, we can still begin again." There was a peaceful silence between them. Both looked out toward the Blue Promise moored by the dock under a thin layer of snow. The wind brushed against it gently, making it sway as if greeting them. Evelyn's voice was quiet but firm. "Richard, do you see? Our son has finally found his way." The wind swept across the lake, carrying with it the faint chime of wind bells. Evelyn pulled her coat tighter, turning to her son with a serene smile. We've sailed through a long wave, Michael. Now it's time to teach the next generation what matters most, not just how to build a boat, but how to keep their hearts steady through the storm." Michael nodded, his eyes calm and bright. "I promise." From inside the workshop, the warm light continued to glow against the falling snow. The blue promise trembled slightly in the breeze, as if bowing to its true master. Evelyn watched it with quiet peace. Winter was no longer an ending, but a new beginning, a place where legacy, love, and forgiveness intertwined, glimmering like light on the lake.